Chapter 1. The Daughter Who Always Stepped In. I paid my family's mortgage for years, covered hospital bills, erased debts, and never once asked for anything in return, until the day I accidentally read an email that proved I was never part of their future. My name is Mary Ann. I'm 46, and I learned the hardest lesson of my life the moment my family decided I was strong enough to be erased. This isn't a story about revenge or screaming matches. It's about what happens when the woman who holds everything together finally lets go and watches it all fall apart without lifting a finger. I have always been the one who stepped in first, not because anyone asked me to, and not because it was ever discussed out loud. It simply happened that way, quietly, over years, until my role became so normal that no one remembered when it began. My name is Mary Ann Cole. I am 46 years old, and I live in a quiet suburb outside Madison, Wisconsin, the kind of place where sidewalks are cleared before sunrise and neighbors wave without knowing much about each other. I work as a senior compliance manager for a regional financial services firm based in the Midwest. My job revolves around risk assessment, documentation, and accountability. I spend my days reviewing contracts, tracing money flows, and asking questions people would rather avoid. I am trained to assume that anything left undocumented will eventually turn into a problem. That mindset did not come from paranoia. It came from experience. I never married. I never had children. A long-term relationship ended in 2012, and after that I chose a life that felt intentional rather than reactive. I built routines that suited me. I paid my bills on time. I slept through the night. I did not feel like I was missing something. I felt like I had finally stopped explaining myself. My family did not see it that way. My father, Thomas Cole, is 73. He spent most of his life as a construction site supervisor, the kind of man who believes endurance is the same thing as character. He respects effort, but only when it looks the way he expects it to. My mother, Elaine Cole, is 70. She stayed home for most of her adult life, then worked part-time at a community daycare. She believes deeply in family loyalty, and she uses guilt the way other people use concern. My younger brother, Jason, is 38. He works as an independent home renovation contractor. He is good with people, bad with planning, and always convinced that the next job will fix everything. Somewhere along the way, I became the safety net. It started in 2013. My mother had a series of medical bills that insurance did not fully cover. My father had refinanced the house to deal with it, and the terms were not good. I offered to look over the paperwork. He said it was already done. A few months later, when the payments started to strain their budget, I covered 1 month, then another. It was presented as temporary. It always was. Then Jason needed help clearing a credit card balance so he could qualify for a truck loan. Then there were gaps between contracts. Then there were unexpected expenses. Each time it was framed as a one-time thing. Each time it became routine. By 2015, I was directly involved in restructuring the mortgage. I spoke with the lender. I organized documents. I transferred money every month to make sure nothing fell behind. No one asked how much it added up to. No one needed to. I was reliable, and reliability has a way of becoming invisible. What I never told anyone was that I kept records. Not because I distrusted them, not because I planned to use them. It was habit, drilled into me by my work. Every transfer saved, every statement archived, every confirmation filed away in a folder labeled Family Support. At the time, it felt no different from organizing work files: clean, logical, responsible. As the years passed, the tone around my help changed. Gratitude faded. Conversations shifted. When something went wrong, my name came up casually, the way you mention a utility that is always there. Mary Ann can handle it. Mary Ann will figure it out. Mary Ann is good with numbers. In 2018, my father asked me to come by the house one evening. He said he needed my signature on some paperwork related to consolidating debt. He made it sound routine, boring even. When I arrived, the documents were spread across the kitchen table, already flagged where he wanted me to sign. I read them carefully. What I saw made my chest tighten. The agreement would have made me jointly responsible for a restructured loan tied to the house, without giving me full access to the terms or any meaningful protection. From a compliance standpoint, it was sloppy. From a personal standpoint, it was dangerous. I told him I needed to see the complete agreement before signing anything. His expression shifted. He said I was overthinking it. He said family should not need that level of scrutiny. He said I was acting like I didn't trust them. I did trust them. That was the problem. I refused to sign, calmly, without raising my voice. My mother sat silently at the table, her hands folded. Jason scrolled through his phone like none of it involved him. The room felt heavier than it should have for a piece of paper. Later that night, my father told me I was making things harder than they needed to be. He said I had changed. He said money had made me suspicious. I drove home with my hands tight on the steering wheel, replaying the conversation, wondering how responsibility had somehow become a flaw. Life went on. The house stayed afloat. Payments continued. I continued sending money. No one mentioned that evening again, but something inside me had shifted. A quiet awareness that my role was not protected by respect or appreciation, only by convenience. By the end of 2019, I finally did something I had never done before. I added everything up. The spreadsheet filled itself easily. Monthly transfers, emergency payments, insurance deductibles, credit card settlements. The total passed $200,000 before I even reached the most recent year. I stared at the number for a long time. It was not anger I felt, it was clarity, the kind that settles in your body before your mind catches up. I realized that I had been holding up a structure that no one else was prepared to support, that my presence had allowed everyone else to avoid responsibility, without ever acknowledging it. I closed the laptop and sat alone in my living room. Outside, snow gathered quietly along the curb, clean and untouched. Inside, I asked myself a question I had never allowed myself to consider before. If I stopped stepping in, who would actually stand up? Chapter 2. The Future I Was Never Part of. The hospital room smelled faintly of disinfectant and warm plastic, a combination I had come to associate with long waits and muted conversations. My mother lay propped up against white pillows, her hair brushed neatly as if that might make the situation feel more controlled. Machines hummed softly beside her, keeping time in a way that felt too calm for what was happening. She tried to reassure me as soon as I walked in. She said the doctors had caught everything early. She said I did not need to worry. I nodded and listened, already reaching for the stack of papers at the foot of her bed. Insurance forms, consent documents, billing estimates. The familiar language of responsibility wrapped around me without effort. I stepped into the hallway to make calls. I spoke to the insurance provider and clarified coverage. I confirmed deductibles. I made sure the right codes were attached to the right procedures. When I returned, a nurse smiled at me and said it was nice to see someone who knew how to handle these things. I smiled back, the practiced kind, and sat down beside my mother. My father arrived later, his jacket still dusted with snow. He asked how she was doing, then turned to me and nodded. No questions, no details, just an assumption that everything was under control. Jason showed up that evening, apologizing for being late, explaining that a job had run longer than expected. He brought coffee for himself and a bag of snacks he set on the counter. He kissed my mother on the cheek and asked if she needed anything. She said no, she was fine. He sat down and started scrolling through his phone. The days that followed blurred together. I took time off work. I coordinated discharge planning. I scheduled follow-up appointments. I paid what insurance did not cover. My mother thanked me softly, more than once. My father said little. Jason said nothing at all. It was during one of those quiet evenings that the email arrived. I was sitting in the small chair by the window, answering work messages while my mother slept. The subject line caught my attention because it included our last name. It was from a local law office. The message was addressed to my father, but my email was copied accidentally. There was an attachment. I hesitated only briefly before opening it. The document was labeled Draft. It outlined a plan for restructuring family assets. The language was formal, careful, stripped of emotion. The house was listed as the primary asset. The proposed beneficiary was Jason. Beneath that was a brief justification, simple and final. Marianne is financially stable and does not require the property. I read the sentence again, slower this time. It did not mention contributions. It did not mention years of payments. It did not mention the mortgage I had helped restructure, the bills I had covered, the stability I had provided. It simply removed me from the future as if I had never been part of the present. I closed the document and sat there, listening to the rhythm of my mother's breathing. For a moment, I wondered if this was a mistake, an early version, a thought experiment. But the more I read, the clearer it became. This was not an idea, it was a decision. I did not confront anyone that night. The next day, I found Jason alone in the kitchen. He was leaning against the counter, phone in hand, the same posture he always took when he did not want to be fully present. I asked him if he knew about the lawyer. He looked up slowly. His face told me the answer before he spoke. He said yes, he knew. He said it had been discussed. He said our parents were just planning ahead. I asked him if he had said anything. He shrugged. He said he did not ask for the house. He said he did not feel comfortable pushing back. He said it was not his decision. I waited for something else, an acknowledgement, a moment of discomfort. It did not come. That was when I understood. Betrayal does not always arrive with cruelty. Sometimes it arrives as convenience, wrapped in silence and justified by comfort. That evening, my father spoke to me directly. He said they were only being practical. He said I was settled, independent, capable. He said Jason needed more help. He said they assumed I would understand. I told him I heard him. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I did not bring up numbers or fairness or years of support. I nodded and let the conversation end. Inside, something shifted, not sharply, but permanently. A few days later, after my mother was discharged, I met my friend Rebecca Lynn for coffee. Rebecca is 49 and works as a human resources director for a healthcare network. She has spent her career watching capable people be leaned on until their contributions disappear into expectation. I told her what had happened. I kept my voice even, focused on facts. She listened quietly, then said something that settled into me in a way nothing else had. They do not think they are doing anything wrong. They think it makes sense because you have always handled it. That sentence followed me home. Life returned to its routine. Work resumed. Bills arrived. Transfers went out. Outwardly, nothing changed. Internally, I was recalibrating. In early 2022, the mortgage payment came due. I did not schedule the transfer. I did not announce it. I simply stopped. At first, nothing happened. Days passed, then weeks. Then my father called and asked if everything was okay. I told him I had reviewed my finances and could no longer support the mortgage. I kept my tone calm, neutral, professional. There was a pause. He said we would talk later. We did not. Instead, the silence grew heavier, expectant. No one asked why, they asked when. By the end of the month, the bank notices began to arrive. I knew because one was forwarded to me by mistake, addressed to the house. I filed it away with the rest of my records. I did not feel angry, I felt focused. I had spent years stepping in automatically, fixing things before they broke. For the first time, I was stepping back, not out of spite, but out of clarity. One evening, as winter eased into spring, I sat alone in my living room and looked around at the quiet I had built for myself. I thought about the future my family planned, the one I was never meant to be part of. I thought about the silence my brother had chosen. I thought about the assumption that I would always be there. Then I opened my laptop, reviewed my accounts one last time, and closed the folder labeled Family Support. The decision did not feel dramatic. It felt precise. Chapter 3. The Day I Stopped Fixing Everything. That clarity stayed with me in the weeks that followed, settling into my routines and quietly changing the way I moved through each day. I did not wake up angry. I did not feel dramatic or defiant. What I felt was deliberate. For the first time in years, my choices were not shaped by anticipation of someone else's crisis. When the next mortgage payment came due, I let it pass. I did not forget. I did not hesitate. I noticed the date on my calendar, closed the app, and went on with my day. I showed up to work, sat through meetings, reviewed compliance reports, and answered questions about other people's financial exposure. I moved through my hours with an unfamiliar sense of space, as if something heavy had been lifted without making a sound. For a while, nothing happened. 2 weeks passed, then 3. I began to realize how much of my life had revolved around preemptive fixing. I had always stepped in before a problem could surface, smoothing things over so thoroughly that no one ever had to sit with discomfort. Now I was not doing that, and the silence felt almost unnatural. The first call came on a Sunday afternoon. My father's voice was cautious, the way it gets when he is testing the ground. He asked if everything was all right. He asked if work had been stressful. He asked if I was feeling well. I listened, then told him calmly that I had reviewed my finances and could no longer support the mortgage payments. There was a pause on the line. He said he understood, though the words sounded thin. He said things had been tight lately. He said they would figure something out. He said we would talk soon. We did not. A few days later, my mother called. Her voice carried concern at first. She asked if I was overwhelmed. She asked if I needed help. When I repeated what I had told my father, the concern shifted into something sharper. She said she did not understand why I would choose this moment. She said timing mattered. She said family mattered. She said they had always counted on me. I let her speak until she finished. Then I said one sentence, evenly, without apology. I am not able to support the mortgage anymore. She inhaled sharply, then exhaled. When she spoke again, her voice had hardened. You are tearing this family apart. The words hung in the air between us. I did not defend myself. I did not argue. I did not list what I had already done. I said nothing beyond what I had already said. There was a long silence, then she told me she hoped I could live with myself. I hung up and sat still, my phone resting in my hand, my heart steady in my chest. After that, the calls multiplied. At first, they came with concern, then confusion, then irritation. My father asked if this was temporary. My mother asked when I planned to resume payments. Jason sent a text that read, "Can we talk about this?" When I agreed to meet him for coffee, he arrived late and slid into the chair across from me with a frown already in place. He said he did not understand what was happening. He said our parents were stressed. He said the bank had started calling. I know, I said. He stared at me as if waiting for more. You have always helped, he said. Why stop now? I told him I had helped because there had been no alternative. Now there was. He shook his head. This isn't fair. I did not argue. I watched his frustration rise and fall without trying to manage it for him. That was new. That was when the story changed. I found out through a call from my Aunt Carol. She asked why I had abandoned my parents while my mother was still recovering. She said people were worried. She said she never thought I would be the kind of daughter who turned her back on family. I asked her what she had been told. She hesitated, then said my mother mentioned that I had decided to focus on myself, that I was too busy, that I had refused to help. The words settled heavily. After that, there were more calls, a cousin who asked if something had happened at work, a family friend who said she hoped everything was okay. Each conversation carried the same undertone, concern mixed with judgment. I had become a version of myself that fit their explanation, simpler and easier to accept than the truth. I did not correct them. Silence became my boundary. During that time, I met my friend Rebecca again. We sat in the same coffee shop, the same table by the window. She listened as I described the calls, the accusations, the way my role had been rewritten now that I was no longer performing it. She nodded slowly and said something that settled into me. When you stop being useful, people will rewrite your intentions so they don't have to face their dependence. That sentence stayed with me. By the third month, the bank notices began to arrive. Official envelopes, neutral language that carried real consequences. One of them was forwarded to me by mistake, my email still listed as a contact from years ago. I opened it, read it carefully, and saved it with the rest of my records. I did not respond, I did not forward it. My father called again, this time angry. His voice was tight, clipped. "This is serious now," he said. "This isn't just about money." "I understand," I said. He said lawyers might get involved. He asked if that was what I wanted. I told him no. I told him I was simply no longer taking responsibility for something that was never mine. There was a long silence. Then he asked if I was trying to punish them. I said no. I said I was done rescuing them. He hung up without saying goodbye. That night I sat alone in my living room, the house quiet around me. I did not feel victorious. I did not feel cruel. What I felt was steady, grounded in a way I had not felt before. For the first time, the weight I had carried was visible, not to others but to myself. A week later, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. It was from a law office in town. Inside was a carefully worded letter requesting a meeting to discuss my obligations regarding family financial support. The language was polite, measured, framed as a conversation. I placed the letter on my desk and looked at it for a long time. I did not feel afraid. I felt ready. Chapter 4. They asked for obligation. I brought facts. I arrived early, not out of nerves, but out of habit. I had learned long ago that arriving early gave me time to settle into a space before it filled with other people's expectations. The building was a modest office complex near downtown Madison, beige walls, low ceilings, and a reception area that smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink. This was not a courtroom. There was no judge waiting behind a bench, no raised voices echoing through a hallway. This was mediation, scheduled deliberately to feel calm, reasonable, and contained. That alone told me everything about what my family hoped to achieve. They wanted obligation without confrontation. They wanted compliance without accountability. The conference room was already prepared when I walked in. A long table, a pitcher of water, legal pads placed neatly at each seat. Karen Whitfield, my parents' attorney, was reviewing documents when I arrived. She looked up, offered a polite smile, and greeted me by name. Professional, measured, careful. A woman who had spent her career smoothing edges before they cut too deeply. My parents arrived together a few minutes later. My father moved slower than he used to, his shoulders slightly rounded. My mother held herself upright, her expression composed but tight. Jason followed shortly after, avoiding my eyes as he took his seat. No one spoke right away. Karen began by outlining the purpose of the meeting. She said this was an opportunity to address misunderstandings. She said mediation was meant to preserve relationships while clarifying expectations. She said the goal was to move forward constructively. My father nodded along. My mother folded her hands. Jason stared at the table. Karen turned to me and asked if I understood why we were there. I said yes. She said my parents were concerned about my decision to stop providing financial support. She said they wanted to know whether this was temporary or if I intended to resume assistance. She said the uncertainty had been stressful. I listened without interrupting. I had learned that letting people finish often revealed more than arguing ever could. When Karen finished, I opened the folder I had brought with me and placed it on the table. The sound of it landing was soft, but it shifted the room. Inside were documents I had organized over several evenings, spreadsheets broken down by year, bank statements, confirmation emails, copies of checks, notes indicating purpose and date, everything clean, labeled, and complete. I slid the first page toward Karen. She stopped speaking. She picked it up and began to read. Her expression changed almost immediately, the practiced neutrality giving way to focus. She turned the page, then another. The room grew quiet. My father leaned forward slightly, squinting at the numbers. My mother glanced from the document to my face, her lips pressed together. Jason shifted in his chair. The spreadsheet summarized every financial contribution I had made from 2013 through 2021, monthly mortgage payments, medical expenses not covered by insurance, emergency transfers, credit card settlements tied to Jason's business. The total sat clearly at the bottom: $286,000. Karen looked up at me. She asked if the numbers were accurate. I said yes. She asked if I could verify each transaction. I said I could. She nodded slowly and continued reading. After a moment, she cleared her throat. She said this information significantly altered the context of the discussion. She said the level of support went far beyond informal family assistance. She said continued pressure or implied obligation could create legal exposure if the matter escalated. My mother spoke then, her voice controlled but strained. She said no one had forced me to help. She said I had offered. She said family does not keep ledgers. I met her gaze and said nothing. Karen responded calmly. She said documentation exists regardless of intention. She said impact matters even when intent is benign. She said clarity protects everyone. Jason finally spoke. He said he was sorry. He said he had not realized how much it had added up to. He said he assumed our parents had managed most of it. He said he never asked for the money. I listened as he spoke, noting the careful distance in his words. Then he added that he hoped we could move forward without resentment. He said he did not want this to damage the family. I recognized the shape of the apology immediately. It was designed to ease discomfort, not to acknowledge responsibility. Karen turned to me and asked what I wanted. The room shifted again. I said I was not seeking repayment. I said I was not asking for ownership of the house. I said I was not interested in revisiting the past or assigning blame. I said my request was simple. I wanted written confirmation that all financial support I had provided was voluntary, that it had ended, that there would be no expectation, implied or otherwise, of future obligation. My father stared at me, his brow furrowed. He asked why that was necessary. He said we were family. He said paperwork made things feel cold. I told him clarity was not cruelty. Karen nodded in agreement. She said my request was reasonable. She said it would prevent future misunderstandings. She said it would provide closure for everyone involved. There was a long silence. Eventually, my father exhaled and nodded, not in agreement but in acceptance. My mother remained quiet. Jason nodded quickly, relief flickering across his face. Karen said she would draft a document and send it for review. The meeting ended shortly after. As we stood to leave, my mother reached for my hand. Her grip was tentative. She said she hoped I understood how difficult this had been for them. I told her I did. Outside, the air felt lighter than I expected. Not triumphant, not vindictive, just clear. I sat in my car for a moment before starting the engine, letting the quiet settle around me. I did not feel like I had won anything. I felt like I had finally stepped out of a role that had never been acknowledged, let alone respected. For the first time in a long while, that was enough. Chapter 5. Karma doesn't need my help. The house sold in early summer, quietly, without any announcement from my family. I found out the way I had found out about so many things before, indirectly. An automated email from a real estate listing service appeared in my inbox, flagged because my address had once been connected to the property. Sold. Closed. Final. I sat at my desk and stared at the screen longer than I expected. That house had been the center of our family for most of my life. Birthday dinners that stretched late into the night, holidays that ended in tension no one named, the kitchen table where bills were spread out and decisions were made with the assumption that I would handle whatever came next. I thought the moment it was gone would feel dramatic, like a line being drawn. Instead, it felt distant. A week later, Jason called. His voice sounded different, thinner somehow, as if the weight he had avoided for years had finally settled into his chest. He told me the sale had gone through, but it had not covered everything. He said there were remaining balances, closing costs, penalties. He said he had taken on most of it himself to help our parents transition into a smaller rental outside town. He did not ask me for money, not directly. He talked around it, mentioned interest rates, talked about how expensive everything had become, how hard it was to stay afloat when work was inconsistent. He said he was doing the best he could. I believed him. When he finished, there was a long pause. Then he said he wished things had gone differently. I did too. We ended the call without saying much else. No accusations, no apologies, just a shared understanding that the ground had shifted and neither of us could pretend otherwise. My parents waited longer. When my mother finally reached out, it was through a message, not a call. Her tone was softer than I remembered, careful. She asked how I was doing. She mentioned the heat, how strange it felt to pack up the house after so many years. She said she hoped work was going well for me. Then, almost as an afterthought, she wrote the sentence I knew had taken her the longest to form. She said she had never realized how much I had been carrying. I read it once, then again. There was no apology in her words, no attempt to undo the past, just an acknowledgement that arrived years too late to change anything. I could feel the weight of it anyway, the quiet admission that something fundamental had been overlooked. I did not respond right away. I set my phone down and went on with my evening. I cooked dinner slowly. I washed dishes. I sat on my balcony and watched the sky darken, the city lights flickering on one by one. Life moved forward around me, steady and indifferent. Later that night, I picked up my phone again and reread her message. I thought about all the moments that had led to this one, the years of stepping in without being asked, the silence that had followed when I stopped, the way responsibility had been treated as character rather than labor. I deleted the message, not out of anger, not out of punishment, out of clarity. I did not respond that night, or the next day, or the day after that. When I eventually did reply, it was brief. I said I hoped they were settling into their new place. I said I was glad they were safe. I did not offer help. I did not explain why. No one asked. That was how I knew something had finally changed. In the months that followed, my life grew quieter in ways I had not anticipated. Without the constant vigilance, without the low-level anxiety of waiting for the next emergency, I had space. I took weekends off without checking my phone. I let emails sit unanswered until Monday. I stopped scanning conversations for hidden requests. At work, the difference was immediate. I was sharper, more present. I stopped smoothing over problems to keep everyone comfortable. When something crossed a line, I said so. Boundaries, I realized, were not just about family. They were a skill I had never been allowed to practice fully until now. One afternoon, I ran into Rebecca at the same coffee shop where we had spent so many hours talking things through. She asked how my family was doing. I told her they were quieter now. She smiled and said quiet was not the same as broken. That stayed with me. I never got my money back. I never took ownership of the house. There was no dramatic confrontation, no moment where everyone suddenly understood what they had done. There was no speech, no apology that tied everything up neatly. and I did not need one. Karma did not arrive as punishment, it arrived as consequence. My parents had to adjust to a life without the safety net they had relied on without naming. Jason had to shoulder responsibilities he had never prepared for. They faced realities they had avoided because I had always been there to soften the impact. I did not cause any of that. I simply stopped holding it together. What surprised me most was how little resentment I carried once I stepped out of that role. Without obligation, without expectation, my anger had nowhere to root itself. It faded naturally, replaced by something steadier and more durable: respect for myself. Looking back now, I understand that revenge doesn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like restraint. Sometimes it looks like choosing not to explain yourself one last time. Sometimes it looks like walking away without burning anything down. If you are listening to this and you recognize yourself in any part of it, in the quiet fixing, the constant stepping in, the belief that love means endurance, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not selfish for stopping. You are not cruel for setting limits. You are not abandoning anyone by choosing yourself. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is step back and let people meet the consequences of their own choices. If this story stayed with you, if it echoed something you have lived or are still living, you are welcome to share your thoughts or simply stay for the next story. This space is for people who are learning, sometimes late, that self-respect is not something you earn by sacrifice.